welcome to Agatha Christie She Watched, our spoiler-heavy look at the movie and TV adaptations of the mystery genre's greatest writer. I'm Bill Peschel of Peschel Press, publishers of the annotated novels of Agatha Christie, and today we'll be talking about international conspiracies, ambitious actors, sinister Chinamen, and fake funerals. It's The Big Four, the 2013 Poirot episode starring David Suchet as Hercule Poirot. But first, let me introduce my partner in marriage as well as crime of the fictional kind, Teresa Peschel. Hello, Teresa. How you doing?
Hi, Bill. My voice sounds a little bit rough today, but that's because, folks, we were at the Pennsylvania Ren Fair on Saturday, and I spent a lot of time screaming, blood, 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 at all of the jousts. So if I sound a little different, that's why. I'm still recovering.
Yeah, but we had a great time anyway.
Oh, it was fun.
And we had a great time last night because we got to see The Big Four.
And it was so much better than what I had been dreading. The novel really is. The novel's really bad. She put it together in a hurry. Agatha had to fulfill her contract. Her marriage was collapsing. She'd had the 11-day disappearance and all the falderall connected to that. And she was not in a writing mood. And she had a family friend, I think, as the story goes, suggesting
Archie's brother.
Okay, so she was listening to the brother-in-law who turned out not to be completely worthless. So she's listening to the brother-in-law not living on her couch. And he said to take a group of short stories and string them together and turn them into a novel. And when you read The Big Four, which I dutifully plowed through, I had never read it before, and now I know why. I dutifully plowed through The Big Four, and it is incredibly episodic. It doesn't feel cohesive at all, other than that you keep meeting the same characters. The story is completely ridiculous. It should either be a much bigger novel or it should be a much tighter, shorter novel where you remove everything that's unrelated. And what I thought was especially strange is I'm pretty familiar with the short stories of Hercule Poirot, and yet I did not recognize any of the Poirot stories in the Big Four. So I do not know if the short stories in the Big Four were ever reprinted as something else. Once she converted them into the Big Four, they kind of disappeared from the canon because
they don't show up in the later collections, that's for sure.
Yeah,
I've read enough of them to know that.
Yeah, they're not in the case book. I did not read any of these. I would have remembered somebody being hit over the head with a leg of lamb because my first thought, of course, was it Roald Dahl?
Yeah, it was the Roald Dahl story that made it into a Twilight Zone episode.
Yes, where the abused wife kills her husband with the frozen leg of lamb and then cooks the lamb and serves it to the nice police investigators, and they never discover what the weapon was because, well, it had been cooked and eaten by themselves.
So the Big Four, as it's converted here, opens with, I can't remember, did it open with the funeral?
Yes, it opened with the funeral, and for a very brief moment, we get to see everybody in the gang except Hercule reassemble because, of course, there's Captain Hastings come back from Argentina because he had received the death notice, and then Miss Lemon and Commissioner Japp, he's now an assistant commissioner, and George the valet, of course. And
it was George the valet who was writing the notes to everybody. So he wrote the note to Captain Hastings.
No, Japp was writing the notes. Japp felt it was his duty to write them. And so we get to see Miss Lemon very briefly again reassembling for Poirot's funeral, but you don't know why he died at this point.
Right, and then it jumps back 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
4 weeks back in time, and you see an intrepid newspaper reporter, and he's telling this ridiculous conspiracy theory to
man from the Foreign Office.
Yes, that's Mr. Ingalls, and Mr. Ingalls looks at him and says, "This is Bulldog Drummond territory." And folks, if you were paying attention, that is an important clue, because Bulldog Drummond, you know this better than I do, but he was, of course, a writer.
Well, this was a character.
Oh, he was a character at the time, and he was like Jason Bourne of today.
That's a kind way of putting it. I think among the stories that really emphasize the jingoism and the racism, think of it as Mickey Spillane's Private Eye. If you ever want to really see what a masculine man squaring off against the world and not giving a fig for what anybody thinks. You read the initial Mike Hammer novels, and they are just a punch in the gut. And Bulldog Drummond is a precursor to that.
But the point is that the Foreign Service office guy who has heard this kind of conspiracy claptrap before, he knows a load of cod swallop when he sees it, and he says, I don't know what you're buying from people sending you things over the transom, but it's garbage. And then we move on to the chess match. But before we get into it, I do want to say that I really was not expecting anything good from this adaptation. The novel is a mess. It is such a mess that the novel that she published after this was The Mystery of the Blue Train, and my God, she was really getting back into her form. Even though she didn't want to write The Blue Train, she did a really nice job. It's a fun novel. It made a wonderful movie. And I don't know why Agatha disliked people who said they really liked The Blue Train. I can understand why she disliked people who said I loved The Big Four. But The Blue Train is a perfectly fine novel, but The Big Four was awful, and I was just dreading this. I knew Mark Gatiss had done the writing, and he did Cat Among the Pigeons, and I thought he did a really good job. And he did Halloween Party, which is one of the latest novels, and she was starting to slide, very much so, in Halloween Party, all of these unfinished plot threads, and he really took and ran with that. That's what he did with this. He really ran with the plot elements in The Big Four and turned it into I liked it. I thought it was a very good film. I thought it was probably the best reworking of the novel you could possibly get and still incorporate most of the novel in the film. And considering how absurd, how ridiculous, how wildly implausible, how these are people with their tinfoil beanies screwed on way too tight and wearing tinfoil suits to go with it to make sure that they are not having the CIA beam radio waves at them. I am amazed that it turned out this well.
So we move on to a number of different plot threads that over time slowly come together.
Yes.
We have Abe Ryland, the American money man.
With a suspicious past.
Madame Olivier, who is French and a scientist involved in various kinds of experiments with drugs.
And the both of them, the reason why they are connected is they are members of the Peace Party, which is an international peace organization founded apparently by the mysterious Chinaman Li Chen-yang. I'm trying to remember the name.
Doesn't appear in the story.
Yeah, he never appears in the novel. He never appears in the novel. He is always the shadowy background figure setting things in motion. And Mark Gatiss ran with that concept because Li Chen-yang, and I know I am saying his name wrong, he is the subject of a magisterial biography by Jonathan Wally, who is a serious Chinese scholar in England. And he is the driving force behind the Peace Party, of which Abe Ryland and Madame Olivier are really super important, highly placed people, like his XO and his next to the XO, one down, 2 or 3 steps down in the organization. And yet you never meet him. He's never anything more than the picture on the painting on the wall or the cover of the book. He is a mysterious background figure who never, ever appears, just like the novel.
I'm looking at the cover of the book because the book plays a role in this. It's Li Chang-yen, so you got...
I got it right?
You got very close there. I think you got it right. And The Struggle for Peace. That's the book by Jonathan Wally.
Who is the Chinese scholar.
The Chinese scholar and this philosophy is kind of motivating the Peace Party that Abe Ryland and Madame Olivier are a part of.
So it all ties together beautifully, all of these threads from the novel, this really terribly written novel, unfilmable novel, and Mark Gatiss took them and made them into something better. And in many ways, they're the same people that they were in the novel, which is really surprising, too, because Madame Olivier is this supercilious, I'm better than you, brilliant French woman. And Abe Ryland, of course, has a mysterious past, and he expects that he can get whatever he wants because he's a rich man.
I also like the fact that he used the Peace Party because it makes for a very effective red herring, because at the time in the run-up to World War II, anybody promoting peace or world government or anything like that can be considered suspect, because part of the motivation behind the Peace Party is essentially appeasement. because you have Hitler invading the Sudetenland, you have Hitler invading Czechoslovakia and making demands as far as reparations for World War I, and you had a lot of people who did not want a repeat of World War I, and they were willing to do anything to prevent it.
And for very good reason, too, let me add, folks. World War I was a meat grinder for everyone who went through it. Cleaning up afterwards, the friends and relatives back home, it was a meat grinder, and they would have done anything to avoid that.
Yeah. But at the same time, the history has shown the appeasers to be on the wrong side of the conflict, I'm afraid.
Yes, you reach that point of what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? And in fact, it was shown after the war that Hitler and his cronies were very worried about invading the Sudetenland, because if France attacked them, they had nothing to respond with. They were not built up nearly as much as they pretended to be. And it was a risk that they took. France could have invaded, thrown Hitler out of office.
And everything would have been different.
Life would have been much different. It's a trousers of time moment, if ever there was one.
Yes, everything would have been different.
So we have that, and going on to Abe Ryland in the chess match, with as part of the peace process that they were promoting.
Yes, they were having this magisterial chess tournament where they brought this famous Russian chess master out of retirement. The Russian embassy, the Russian government agreed, and this is one of the short stories that was compiled into the Big Four. And it was almost exact in terms of, you had the Russian grandmaster. His health was poor, but he had come out to play one final exhibition match, and he was getting really well paid for this. And he reaches his hand. He's playing the Rui Lopez, which is a very standard, very famous opening, and lots of chess players use it because it works really well and gets everything off moving quickly. And I can't remember my chess at all, although I do know how to move the pieces around. But he moves the
bishop out.
Yeah, he moves the bishop out, because everyone knows that he always opens with the Rui Lopez, so he moves his white bishop out and sets it down, and bzzzt, and he dies electrocuted by an electrified chess man. And this is right out of the story.
They didn't know at the moment. They thought he died of a heart attack. But
yes, and in the story, that is what happened. Poirot went back and figured it out. They didn't realize at first, because there's a thin metal rod that is, the chess piece was drilled out, and a thin metal rod was drilled up through the chess piece, and the board was electrified. And when he set the piece down on that particular silver square, because that was how the board was made, that metal square, that's when he completed the circuit by placing the rod down and was electrocuted. And it's very clever, and she wrote this back in like 1920 something, and then it was repurposed for the Big Four, and here it is again. And it works. It really works. And I have to say, as I'm watching all of these incredibly well-dressed people standing around two guys at a chessboard, everybody's in evening dress, everybody looks great, and I do know something about playing chess, but I don't like it. And I think chess is one of those games that if you are a chess fan, you are simply riveted. And if you are not a chess fan, a player or a fan, you are trying to chew your arm off to get out of that room. And I remembered an experience that Bill and I had when we went to the farm show, the Pennsylvania Farm Show in Harrisburg, and there's a competition called Sheep to Shawl. And a lot of chess matches are just like Sheep to Shawl. You have moments of high drama when the sheep is being sheared, or when you pass over the first hank of spun yarn to the weaver, and for the rest of it, well, if you're serious about wool and fiber arts, you are riveted as you watch teams of spinners spinning that freshly carded wool into yarn, and other people who are not interested in fiber arts like Bill are looking for the escape routes. And
you just go off to the bathroom, or you go off and get some fresh made milkshakes, maybe with a little bit of something from the bottle to put in there to kind of pass the time.
Anything to pass the time. Yes, and chess matches, for those of you who have not seen chess matches, I don't care how beautifully dressed the crowd is. You either are interested because it's chess. Oh my God, he's opening with the Rui Lopez. What is he going to do when there comes a point where the match changes, where the players stop where they do something different. They aren't following the exact set pattern, because if you follow the exact set pattern, after a certain point, then you're just playing it's like paint by numbers. You're not really playing the game.
Well, you're making the optimal moves, which is nowadays, thanks to computers, you can have a chess match that's an optimal move for each turn up to about 15 to 20.
But after that,
and then after that, once they're not in the pattern, then it becomes a matter of actually sitting there and thinking.
Yes, how good are you? Yep. And so if you know that, and so this makes sense for you non-chess players, this actually really makes sense. If you know that the master always opens with the Rui Lopez, then you know exactly what he is going to move for at least the first 6 moves. And so on move number 4, he picks up his white bishop and moves it to whatever the number of the particular square is. You know it's going to happen. Bzzz, and he slumps forward, electrocuted, and everybody thinks that he's either had a massive stroke or a massive heart attack, because, of course, the last thing you think is that, oh, the chessboard was electrified?
Well,
Really?
just that piece, not the entire board. This is a complicated system. An electrician could actually, because they figured out there's a panel in one of the floor tiles, because he had to have his foot on that electrified panel, and he had to touch the bishop and put it on that square,
and
which was
complete
electrified.
the electrical circuit.
And close the circuit.
Bzzz.
So, after 15 minutes of talking about the chess match, let's move on, shall we? Because we have only so much time.
But yeah, and so this is where, again, the intrepid reporter Taiso, he shows up at the chess match. He crashes a chess match, and again, these folks should have been grateful to have anybody from the outside to show up to cover the chess match, because 99.99% of the world is thinking, really? This is so boring. Let's go watch some footy. And but anyway, Taiso shows up, makes his accusation of Abe Ryland, and then and then of course the Grandmaster, bzzz,
Yep.
and then we're off to the races. And so from then on, then we get another mysterious murder, which is the Chinese scholar Jonathan Wally, and this one again, the storyline is taken right out of the text.
Right, he's found in his house. His head bashed in.
His head bashed in, his throat cut,
and just the maid is there, the housekeeper's there, and his servant.
And his personal servant, his valet. And this is a relatively new valet, and the housekeeper implies, and this is important, and this is one of those things that could have been brought out a little bit more. Wally was unmarried. He was a confirmed bachelor, and what the housekeeper implies is that he was impossible to live with. Mm-hmm. He was so much of a Chinese scholar, so much of a cinephile, that
he didn't have friends.
He didn't have friends.
He admitted that.
He had all of his friends were correspondents, like correspondence chess players. All of his friends were via correspondence only. You know, you write back and forth with information about the subject of interest, but had no family. He had a nephew that he raised because kind of he was forced to. And he was not a very pleasant man. And suddenly he's coshed on the head, and then it looks like it is the valet who turns out to have a criminal record, and the valet has this ridiculous story about, oh, I came out of prison, and one of those come back to Jesus pastors was there, and he got me this job, and I was so grateful, and I have no idea who it was, and of course nobody at the prison knows what he's talking about. Nobody knows what he's talking about, but Poirot is able to prove that even though it looks like the valet did it, and the valet admits to stealing the ivory figurines because he knew he was going to get hung for this crime anyway because of his criminal record. He saw the boot print. He saw the criminal record. You know, he knows his criminal record. He saw the bloody boot print from
which
a boot,
matches
his exactly. And he thought, oh, I'm going to swing for this. And I didn't do it. If I can just get out of here with those valuable ivories, I'll be okay. But events overtake him, and he's arrested, and the local Bobby is convinced that he did it because, of course, everything is set up to make him look guilty, and then Poirot recognizes that he didn't. He couldn't have, because there's a big leg of mutton on the table in the kitchen, the kind of thing that the Food and Drug Administration and the USDA, all the health departments say, oh my God, you're letting something thaw on the counter without even a bowl over it to keep the flies off. And it was frozen. Mm-hmm. And Poirot knows, and this is very much a piece of its time, not just that you have a piece of raw meat on the counter without a bowl over it to keep the flies off, because my mother thaws things that way, and so do I, but that you had this big piece of meat that had to have been delivered by the butcher, and because that day, and it was still frozen, which meant that it had just been delivered.
And it was delivered on a Monday when apparently butchers deliver on a Saturday.
Yeah, they deliver on a Saturday.
It was a wrong day for delivery.
And Sundays, remember, Sunday is a day of rest in which you were supposed to be at church. And then Monday you were getting back into the swing of things, but you cleaned out your shop on Saturday, because remember, you don't really have necessarily a lot of storage, a lot of frozen storage. So Monday is a business day, but you wouldn't necessarily be making deliveries. And Poirot looked at that and realized there had been somebody else in the house, somebody who, if he was seen making a delivery, nobody would think anything of it, because, of course, the butcher makes deliveries to the grand houses on a regular basis, and it's okay if the butcher has a little blood on his clothes, because that's his line of work. And so, yes, of course, once he realizes this, and they start asking the neighbors all say, why, yes, I did see the butcher's van drive up. And the butcher says, no, I didn't do that.
Which means somebody else did. So there's that particular story. And then we can move on to Flossie Monroe, the actress.
Yes, and again, she came right out of the text. She is an aging actress. She stopped being an ingenue a long time ago, and she's probably in her 40s. She no longer plays Juliet. She plays the nurse.
Although, frankly, I was amused. I actually looked up Sarah Parrish, who plays her, and she was 45 when she did the role. And the nurse is actually a part for older women. You're supposed to be almost a crone to play that particular part. So but for an actress who is out of her freshness and no longer, in her prime, then yes, she starts moving into the older parts.
If you're 45 and female in the Hollywood business, you're a crone. Remember, there are 3 stages for women actresses: ingenue, district attorney, grandma. And you stay an ingenue as long as you possibly can. For those of you who have not seen...
First Wives Club?
Oh, The First Wives Club. Yes, thank you. I completely blanked out on the title. The First Wives Club. It's based on an Olivia Goldsmith novel, and it's really amusing. And Goldie Hawn plays the aging actress, and she is the one who says, ingenue, district attorney, grandma. And she is not going to be a grandma. She is not going to play the grandma, and she is fighting to hang on to those ingenue roles because, of course, once you get past the age of, let's face it, 25 in Hollywood, you're a disgusting old crone who will never have sex again, and no man could possibly look at you, which is why you get 65-year-old men as the lead and 20-year-old women as their hottie. And
you're still thinking about Sabrina, I think it was. Wasn't that with
Harrison
Ford?
Oh, my God. It was one after the other. They do it all the time. And
that was the one that really, even people who don't normally follow this sort of process go, really? This is, he was long in the tooth back then, and just, even more now. So,
But anyway... yes. So there's Flossie Monroe, and because she is in the actress herself is in her 40s. So yes, she is of course playing the nurse because she is of course an old crone, a hag at 45. What else could she possibly do? She couldn't possibly be fresh and juicy and hot, which is in a way why it was really nice to see that somebody did think she was young and fresh and hot and still panted after her.
She was getting notes from her an admirer signed 4 kisses.
Yes, Yes, a mysterious admirer, and she has fallen down the food chain in terms of repertory theater. You know, she never made it into the big leagues, because if she had made it into the big leagues, she would still be playing Juliet, but she with a lot of makeup. But she didn't. She was never top tier. And in fact, she is actually doing better than she did in the novel. In the novel, she was grateful for Poirot to provide lunch because she would go hungry some days. And but she's getting these mysterious admirers, you know, the flowers, champagne, beautiful Valentine, even though it was in April. And the actress playing Juliet is looking at this, and you can see that hint of envy of, why are you old bag, getting a Valentine and flowers when I, the young hot ingenue playing Juliet, am not.
So we have that subplot going on as well, and we go on to the next murder at the Painter household.
Yes, and this is Stephen Painter, and he is the third part of the triumvirate, say the third of the gang of four, of Abe Ryland and Madame Olivier and whoever the destroyer is, or Li Chen Yang, and he looks like he's number 4, and he is feeling reluctant, and we have seen already that he is closer to Madame Olivier than he should be. Certainly his wife thinks so. He has a ne'er-do-well nephew, shadowing another ne'er-do-well nephew. He has a ne'er-do-well nephew, and then Stephen Painter dies horribly, really nastily, very nasty. He has a heart condition. And even if you have a heart condition, you're probably not going to fall over onto an electric grate and basically have your face burned off. It's really, be cooked to death. It's really gross. And then the autopsy reveals that he had been drugged.
With a paralyzing drug that doesn't kill him but leaves him conscious.
Yes, and this is the same paralyzing drug that Madame Olivier has been working with. And of course, remember, he has a physician on staff all the time, and you have to wonder, where was this physician? Dr. Quentin. Where was Dr. Quentin? And Dr. Quentin wasn't doing a very good job with his patient.
Well, you couldn't. He's not sleeping with the guy.
One would hope not.
Because they questioned him about it. He said, well, I talked to him, and he was excitable, and he couldn't sleep, and I suggested a tonic, and he said, no, I'm fine. I'm just going to go to bed. And then, well, Dr. Quentin went to bed too, because
doctors have to sleep too.
Doctors sleep too.
And I did think that was kind of strange, because you're watching this very rich man, Stephen Painter, rich, well-connected man, important man in the peace party, and he's also obviously a hypochondriac because he's so worried about his health that he has to have essentially a live-in doctor. And I'm thinking, wow, it must be really nice to be able to be a rich hypochondriac that you can afford a live-in doctor, just like a live-in valet or a live-in butler. And no, not just a servant, a doctor. So that if you're feeling, oh, I'm feeling faint, or oh, I had a palpitation, or oh, I had a muscle cramp in my toe. Oh, doctor, you must look at me right now.
Right. So we have all these murders. The press is ginning up the story even further.
Doing exactly what you would expect intrepid reporters to do, because, hey, this is what sells newspapers. Reality doesn't really matter too much, or the truthfulness, as long as you are really selling those newspapers and you're putting out more and more and more. And you are in the newspaper biz. You know how that works. Yeah,
but also I can understand his point of view, because he's receiving this, Tyso's receiving these missives from supposedly inside the Big Four. He even encounters his informant in a dark garage, shades of Watergate, and only to find him knifed in the back. And you think, wow, this must be totally real. Yeah, from his point of view, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't he think that way? But like you say, there's so many elements in here that was really very puzzling, including, I'm just thinking about now, where the murder of Stephen Painter is intended to point the finger at Madame Olivier, and yet she's supposed to be one of the Big Four. If the card clues are any indication, I'm thinking, why is that?
Well,
happening?
And there was also the fact that whoever murdered Stephen Painter dipped his finger in ink, and then, remember, he's a dying man. drugged and face in an electric heater, and he still manages to dip his finger in the ink and draw a very nice letter G on a piece on the notepad next to his bed.
Somehow managing to
somehow
do that
managing
before he got dragged to the heater, or after, and then went back to the heater and put his face down, because that's what you're supposed to do. I guess I'm supposed to be killed.
Yeah, and
anybody who's watching this, if they're fast enough on the draw, they're going to look at a lot of this and go, "This is nonsense.
This is nonsense. This doesn't make any sense. Why would somebody do this?" Particularly the Steven Painter clue, because that is so ridiculous. Because when did he find the time? he's awake, he's alive, but he's unable to move, completely paralyzed, and yet he's going and being dragged over to have his face shoved face first into a space heater to be cooked to death, and yet he manages on the bedside pad to draw the letter G in ink, so he has an ink-stained fingertip. And you're thinking, what?
But this is one of those ways that Mark Gatiss and Ian Hallard set this up, where they didn't do more. Because remember, you got to play fair. You're supposed to play fair with the reader/viewer. So they just show this, but they don't have Poirot commenting much on this, except to just sort of state this is what's happened. And it's up to the audience to go, wait a minute. What the heck?
Yeah, because we don't have Hastings either on hand. And in fact, that's something else that happened, is that we see Miss Lemon, and we occasionally see Jap, but Hastings and Miss Lemon, they appear at the beginning and they show up at the end, but they're really not in this they're really not in the film.
Yeah, they play no role. And even Hastings lampshades that, because near the end, when Poirot is dead and he's raging at the Jap, saying, "We got to carry on. We got to find out what to do here. I'm going to get to the bottom of this." And he walks outside the door and he looks off screen, off the camera, and say, "What do I do next?"
And then we don't see Hastings again
until the very end. But there is the clue from the death of the informant. There's a label in the costume, label there that Poirot tracks down to a theatrical costumer. And
yes.
All of a sudden you start getting the glimmers of where the truth lays.
Yes, because you also have the hint of there's something here in the theater world with Flossie Monroe, because this is an indication to the audience that obviously there's something theatrical about this, because why else would you occasionally be seeing Flossie Monroe if the story doesn't tie up into and this is why it has nothing to do with real life, but why would Flossie Monroe be involved in this storyline somehow unless she does figure in this storyline? And so this is when, by this time, Poirot, there's been 3 murders that seem to be, no, maybe even 4 murders that are completely unrelated, and that is the chess master, the Jonathan Wally, the Steven Painter, and then the informant. So 4 murders, and he's trying to figure this out, and theatrical, and then he goes back to Wally. He goes back to Jonathan Wally's house, because he's already interviewed Mrs. Painter and Gerald Painter, the ne'er-do-well nephew, and neither of them have any idea what's going on. But he doesn't get a sense of there's more information to be discovered. So he goes back to Wally, where the house has not been touched. And then he discovers that the ne'er-do-well nephew has never come back, despite the fact that this is an estate to inherit.
Right.
Yes, the ne'er-do-well nephew has not reappeared, despite the fact that he's the only possible heir to what looks like a lot of valuable artifacts that can be sold for a good price down at the auctions. And Poirot starts going through things, and then he finds the connection to the
theatrical world.
The theatrical world, another connection, because remember, the informant was wearing a theatrical costume. The informant who was knifed, he was wearing a gentleman's evening dress, 30 years out of date, very well made, and But all of the
labels
labeling
were removed except for a partial of one.
Yes, and that one didn't quite get finished cutting out, which of course allows for a nice clue, and it proves that the people who are criminals really should do a better job of snipping out the labels. But there you are. We have to have this. So he sees another theatrical he sees a theatrical connection, and then he's at Wally's house and discovers that the nephew, who has not reappeared to claim an enormous inheritance, was a major theater buff. He had his own toy stage. He had marionettes. He had, because that was the Japanese emperor puppet in the corner, Japanese emperor, Chinese emperor. Mm-hmm. I was a big marionette in the corner. There was the paper stage where you could move the people back and forth. There were plays. There were scrapbooks full of stuff.
But it was all surrounding the Methuselah players.
It wasn't
company.
at first, but you saw more and more and more of the Methuselah players, and so then Poirot starts interviewing, and we see little snippets, sometimes just for a few seconds, of him talking to somebody, and eventually he ends up talking with Flossie Monroe. And she has no idea who he's talking about because, of course, the ne'er-do-well nephew, he doesn't have the same last name. And it turns out later on that he changed his name completely, first name and last name. And in that day and age, if you change your name, you just changed your name and nobody knew any different.
Yeah, I believe it was by deed poll. You just file it and it's legally changed, and that's it. There's no big deal about it. And, of course, you don't have much in the way of IDs back then, too. You don't have photo IDs back in 1936.
I don't know if you even had driver's licenses. I guess you did, but they wouldn't have had a picture.
Right.
So most people stayed in their community, and they didn't travel extensively. And when you did travel, you took letters of reference with you from other people who had been there. Miss Marple talks about this in the novels after the war, where there was so much upheaval that you would have somebody new move into the village, and they told you who they were, and you had to take their word for it because you did not actually know.
That was in A Murder is Announced.
That's right. That's right. And Poirot would have said the same thing after the war. And you're seeing a little hint of that where you have somebody traveling around telling you who they are, and you have to accept it because you don't actually know.
But Poirot figures it out. He figures out the connection, and with Flossie's help, sets up a trap.
Yes. Oh, somewhere along the line, by the way, he is finding out the information, and this is when you discover why Poirot apparently was killed at the beginning. And again, this is right out of the novel. Poirot is killed in an explosion. Hastings has to go off and try and solve the murder all by himself, and he kind of vanishes. He flounders around in the novel, but in the film he vanishes off screen completely. But Poirot is killed in a bomb blast. He was set up by one of the big four. The Destroyer, the fourth person, death personified, the tarot card of death. And so you have the funeral. And
let's face it, this is not really a big surprise. If you see the funeral for Poirot in the beginning, you know he's not going to die. And if you know your Sherlock Holmes, you understand this is what Agatha Christie is playing off of.
Yeah, she is playing off of this. And so he supposedly dies in a bomb blast, and now we're all caught up with the opening scene where everybody is getting the notification of Poirot's funeral. And I do have to say I would have expected a much larger crowd at the funeral. And also, since this is taking place in the spring in England, I could not understand why it was snowing, but there you are.
It's either fortuitous or they did it intentionally, because you need to have it. They couldn't have pouring down rain outside. I mean, some of these actors, they're pretty old right now. You don't want Hastings to catch a cold. So, okay, we'll throw some cornstarch at them.
Even though it's standard in Hollywood that when you have the funeral scene, it's raining because everybody is crying, even the sky. But you have the funeral for Poirot, and so there's Miss Lemon, and there's George the valet, and Hastings, and Commissioner Japp. And I really expected a much larger mob of people at the funeral. I really did. They should have filled that cemetery because Poirot was extremely famous. And this would have been an extremely famous case, and if they were having a private funeral where they did not want to be surrounded by the press, then I think a single line of dialogue would have sufficed to say we're having a private funeral.
Because he was so vainglorious about his popularity.
He would have wanted to go out with 1,000 mourners and the entire church filled with floral arrangements to the rafters, and so many more floral arrangements out in the graveyard that you're tripping over the damn things. He would have wanted that.
They did do a job of hand-waving away all the aspects about the funeral and the bomb blast, because the body is never found.
That's right.
And obviously Assistant Commissioner Japp did not know about the whole thing, that Poirot was still alive. So they had to get some official confirmation that Poirot is dead.
Yeah, because even if you have a pretty big bomb blast, there's usually bits left. You can find bits.
What was in the coffin?
What was in the coffin?
This elaborate coffin and, this elaborate funeral. And they have to convince everybody that Poirot is dead. So at least you had to have some official acknowledgement. You could see that Tyso was involved in promoting and writing the story about Poirot being dead and all that, so they have his cooperation, but they have to have police cooperation in this. Yeah,
there had to have been some kind of police and Secret Service cooperation, because otherwise, who's going to give you the death certificate, and what are you burying in the coffin? A couple of rocks? I mean, even if you have a huge bomb blast like that, there are things left. There are pieces of body left. You can find pieces.
Yeah.
And who knows what pieces they found. But anyway, so they kind of gloss over that. But again, this is if you are an astute mystery reader, an astute mystery movie watcher, you're watching this and thinking, but, what's in the coffin?
Yeah.
And then then we come to Flossie Monroe at this abandoned theater, the Methuselah Theater, and she is going up there
for an audition.
Going for an audition, and then she discovers who it is. And this is when we discover that it was all a trap set up by Poirot in order to find who number 4 is.
So there's actually 2 traps at work here, because we have the trap by number 4 to lure Flossie to the theater,
and Poirot's trap to unmask.
Let Flossie go there and unmask number 4.
And unmask number 4, and then you discover that, just like the clue that you were given at the very beginning, when Ingalls tells reporter Tyso that this is Bulldog Drummond territory, and you should just ignore this because this is just a lot of silliness, he was right. This was all a lot of falderall, but people want to believe in conspiracies.
It was a theatrical setup. So that our actor person, who was Jonathan Wally's ne'er-do-well nephew, not the other ne'er-do-well nephew of Gerald Painter's.
Stephen Painter's. Not Stephen Painter's ne'er-do-well nephew. No, this was a different ne'er-do-well nephew. This was this was Jonathan Wally's ne'er-do-well nephew. And he was actually a really talented character actor. He could completely disappear into a role. And so he was making everything happen from the back. He had been planning it for a long time. He had the ability. He had the time. He had the craziness. You wonder how he came up with the money. But he was also playing on what people wanted to believe. And the newspaper man was a prime example. The newspaper man ate it up. Oh my God, a worldwide conspiracy with evil Chinamen and an evil French scientist and an evil American manufacturer with a shady past. Oh my God, this all has to be real, and I'll sell 1 million papers. And Tyso absolutely swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. And once you get something in the newspapers, even if it's just, it takes on a life of its own. And you can look at any dramatic thing that is happening in the world, like, massive riots in India or train wrecks, and you can say it must have been caused by somebody. And you can look around today And you can see people coming up with all kinds of conspiratorial explanations. Oh my God, the lizard people did this, or oh my God, the aliens have landed and are walking amongst us even as we speak. Now the problem though is that sometimes it turns out that conspiracy is right. But you really have to be careful about this, about running ahead of what your data actually says.
Well, think of the big Martin satanic rituals daycare scandals back in the 80s. That was complete and utter. I can't say the word I want to say, but it's nonsense. Complete and utter nonsense.
Codswallop. It was
codswallop. And it unfortunately destroyed several people's lives.
It destroyed many people's lives. And we, it's almost like human beings are wired to want to believe in a big overarching conspiracy that is running the world. And all you have to do is look around and say, if there really was a big overarching conspiracy to run the world, you know what? They'd do a better job.
You hope so, at least.
One would hope they do a better job. It's like the conspiracy about how at one and the same time the federal government is supposed to be this incredible, all-powerful, all-knowing group of people, and at the same time complete doofuses who cannot find their own ass with both hands.
And a map.
And I have worked with the federal government. I have been in the Navy, and let me tell you, they are not that smart, but they're not that dumb either. It's really easy to fall in line with conspiracy thinking. And in a way, that's what this whole episode was about. It was how easy it is to believe what you want to believe.
Yeah, particularly if it falls in with your way of thinking in the first place. If it's something that's the opposite of what you naturally believe, then it becomes more difficult. You start becoming more, let's see the proof, let's see what's going on here. But if it automatically falls in line with what you already think, you're more inclined to just fall in line with it.
Oh yes, and that's as our villain tells Tyso at the climax. I knew you would believe it. You're a reporter. It means by definition you're gullible. You want to believe the gruesome, ridiculous, over-the-top theatrical story that will sell newspapers and that suits the way you already think.
There's some interesting lines there, particularly about actors. About you see David Suchet as Poirot, telling our actor, you could have been one of the great character actors of our time. And then the character actor says, and look at you, aren't you just the same with your setups and your theatrical conclusions, and you have to have everybody's attention. You're no different from me.
And Poirot is not really pleased to be told that. But the actor isn't wrong.
The actor isn't wrong. And yes, but there are differences. That's such a cliche, you and me, we're both the same when you think about it, as the Joker says to the Batman.
Well, they both kill millions of people.
That's true, and the Batman never kills the Joker, so
whereas
the Joker is allowed to go on and continue committing mayhem.
Horrible, gruesome crimes, because Batman gets dainty when it comes to the Joker. So all of those NPCs have no value. All of those other people, they're just there to be, killed.
Well, this version of the Big Four has value. It's well worth watching.
Oh, really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. You can cheerfully skip reading the novel because oh my God. It was the novel is really sad, but it's not sad in the way that her late novels like Postern of Fate or Elephants Can Remember are sad, where you can see that she used to be the best. Age and an aging brain got to her and she couldn't write the way she used to anymore. And the Big Four doesn't have that excuse. But the film that they made of it was really excellent. I was very pleased. It's not in the top 10, but it's so much better than it should have been in every way.
And using the same pieces from the novel. I'm surprised at just how much of it came from the books. It's just interpreted in a slightly different fashion, a little twist here, a little misdirection there, and it turned out to be excellent.
Oh, yes, it was excellent, and they really used everything they could from the novel and turned it on its head and made it all work. So, yes, you should watch The Big Four.
And this concludes another episode of Agatha Christie She Watched. Next time, we're going to be looking at The Labors of Hercules.
Which I hope won't be a labor to watch, but we'll find out, folks.
So this is Bill Peschel.
And Teresa.
And
come out to Books in Lancaster on Saturday, the 17th of September 2022, and meet us in person. And if you're hearing this after Saturday, September 17th, 2022, and can't come out to Lancaster to meet us in person at Books, look at our website. We do a lot of events. And if you're in the central Pennsylvania area, you can see what we have coming up, and you can meet us then, and we'll talk Agatha Christie.
And next time, we'll see you at the movies. Agatha Christie She Watched is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel. Produced by Bill Peschel. Theme song, Call to Adventure by Kevin MacLeod. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.